in a recent online virtual tasting. Half of the participants described this Beaujolais wine as artificial bubblegum. The other half didn't detect that note at all. It was exactly the same wine, coming from the same producer, the same vintage, purchased at the same location, although we were tasting at different locations because it was virtual. So what happened? I spent over 30 years as a sensory scientist studying how people are perceiving aromas and flavors, and I've seen that all the time. What's happening in the virtual tasting I just described was not about the wine. It was how we learn how to taste in traditional wine school, how we have been trained. Because most wine students are taught to learn a lot of things first and use that knowledge to search into the wine what it is supposed to taste. Because most wine students are taught first to acquire a lot of knowledge, to know a lot of details about wines and regions, and then to look for it into the glass. That's what I call a top to bottom process, or a top to bottom tasting trap. This is exactly why blind tasting feels like guessing all the time, because you're not sure about what you're sensing. You don't really sure how to describe what you smell or what you taste. You really don't trust your palate. You don't trust your senses, even after taking all these certification classes. But it's not that your senses are failing you when you are guessing and struggling. It's the method that you learned. So in this video, I'm going to show you a different way to taste wine and to deepen your wine knowledge through tasting. It's what I call the bottom-up process, and I've had dedicated a previous video on that topic, but here I'm going to demonstrate you exactly what I mean by bottom-up process and take you through the tasting. And we are going to look at two different Gamay wines, two Beaujolais. By the end of this video, you will have a simple process that you can use at home to stop second guessing and start trusting your senses to actually expand your wine knowledge through tasting. Okay, we talk about tasting, let's do it. I will walk you through it. This is how I approach bottom-up tasting, or what I simply call sensory tasting. First, I carry out a blind tasting. I minimize any information I can be exposed to before tasting the wines. So that's why I'm hidden the bottles in those sleeves. I haven't looked which bottle I put in which sleeve. And I have poured these two glasses of wine. And I will call them number 1 and number 2. So the less I know, the better. So I will go through the tasting and demonstrate it to you. Once the tasting is done, I've written all my tasting notes. I will unveil the bottle, see the labels, and I will look for information about these wines because I want to learn about these wines through my tasting notes and any additional information that is available online or through the winery, so that I can relate my perception with the technical knowledge that is shared with me. So that's the main point. I start by sensing and then collect the knowledge and make the link between the two. That's not the way the top to bottom process works. It starts by the knowledge and then you try to find it in the glass. That's why it doesn't work. So once I collect all this information and look at my tasting note, I will try to see, any pattern, any things that I can use to interpret what I sensed with how the wine was made or where the wine is coming from. All right, so the tasting protocol that I follow is available in this document. I will put a link in the description below so that you can download it. So first, I have my two glasses of wine, number 1 and number 2. I will start by smelling the first glass, try to describe as best as I can, what I experience. I will use my favorite tool, the wine aroma wheel, to describe the aroma by category or as precisely as I can. And then I will proceed to smell the second glass. So it's what I call a comparative tasting. We compare the two wines side by side, first on the aroma perceived by smell, and then when we taste, we'll compare the two wines based on the taste and aromatics and mouthfeel perceptions that we experience. I really love comparative tasting for you to experiment with because it helps you compare and contrast two wines, and it helps you improve your ability to differentiate flavor nuances between these two wines. So it's a good practice to always conduct a comparative tasting when you try to learn about a varietal wine, about a region, so that you can learn by comparison. And our brain is very good at comparing. So it's a great practice to adopt. All right. So I'm going to smell the first glass. And then the second one. So I have a break here. That's well. Actually, I will read the tasting notes that I've taken before I recorded this video, because I usually take my time when I smell and taste wine. It can take 5 or 10 minutes to have a good descriptions, because I really want to capture all what the wine has to tell me. So for this first wine number 1, that was qualified as bubblegum by my colleagues, I had found a red cherry note, was very fresh, and then the violet aroma, a floral violet aroma. And then something green, like a dry herb, came to my nose. Something spicy like clove, and I had some rubber, kind of sulfury note, a rubber. It's still there, but now the violet is coming. It's coming through big time. So that was for wine number 1. The number 2 was quite different. The intensity was stronger. And I had a lot of red berries and also blackberries, strawberry and blackberry. And then a perception of chocolate or vanilla. These aromas, chocolate and vanilla, are quite close. And later on, a black licorice note occurred. So those two wines are very different styles. So that's the first step, comparative tasting by smell. Then you repeat the same process by tasting. I highly recommend that you rinse your palate with water between wine number 1 and wine number 2, so that you remove any residual aromas or taste or sensation in your mouth. So again, I have tasted the wine before, and I don't think it's very interesting for you to look at how I'm tasting wine. The first wine number 1, I got a lot of acidity in the mouth. My mouth was really watering. Medium astringency, it was a dry wine, no residual sugar, medium alcohol. And in terms of aromatics, I had some spicy note and red fruit. It was quite a light body. In contrast, the second wine had medium acidity, so it was less acidic than wine number 1. Medium body, quite astringent. And in terms of mouthfeel, in addition, I had some medium alcohol, but it was warming up, so it was lingering and warming up in my mouth. And in terms of the aromatics, I had violet and some red fruits. It was, somewhat complex wine. It was very lingering. The violet lingered, the warming sensation lingered, and then a plum aroma appeared. So it was, somewhat complex wine, quite balanced. The two are very different in terms of the aromatics and the taste structure and the feel. So that's how I take my notes, and I recommend that you do the same process, experiencing the wine through your senses first, and then look for information. I only evaluate the wine appearance at the end of my evaluation, because I don't want the appearance to bias my evaluation of the aroma, taste, or mouthfeel. And I have dedicated a video for that and give you all the reason in this video that is showing up here. So again, the less you know about the wines, the better, and the more objective you can be in your tasting. So my approach to sensory tasting starts by the tasting. We just completed that step. But before going to the interpretation, I want to go back to my opening remarks about the fact that some of my colleagues, tasting with me online, perceived notes that others didn't. And quite massively, half of them perceived these cooked artificial notes that is really reminiscent of what a classic Beaujolais Nouveau Beaujolais made with full carbonic maceration will taste like. So I'm not saying that my peers were wrong. What I'm saying is that over the course of their studies, they have learned to associate full carbonic maceration made traditionally in Beaujolais with those cooked candy notes, artificial flavor notes, cotton candy notes that they have learned to associate and describe Beaujolais wines that way. So when they were introduced to the wine we were tasting, saying it's a Beaujolais, flip, their brain flip the switch on and say, well, this is what you're looking for in the glass. And some of them, just went through the traditional route of the top bottom process unconsciously, of course, because when you learn something, you develop some habits, and that's what was happening. So what I'm offering you here is to work at changing that habit and not thinking first about what you should be tasting in the wine, but let your senses discover what you experience. Otherwise, you can be experienced the same phenomenon and tasting through knowledge and not through what your senses are detecting. Other, descriptors that were used during that session could also be explained by associations that we have learned along the way. For example, the wine number 1 was very acidic, and I mentioned that. So some descriptors that were used in our panel were tart cherry, tart strawberry, cranberries, and red currant. So aromas of fruits that are very acidic. And that's another thing when we perceive a strong taste, like a strong acidity, lots of salivation, strong watering in your mouth, and you perceive red fruit at the same time. Immediately your brain said, well, the fruit was tart. Well, maybe it's an association that has been learned, but it's tart fruits don't have a lot of flavors. They have strong acidity. So that's another indication that we have learned those associations, and we use those descriptors to not only describe the aromatics, but the aromatics and the taste combination. And again, there is nothing wrong with that. I'm just giving you these insights to help you understand what tasting notes might be meaning. Okay, so let's move on to the second part of the bottom-up process of sensory tasting, which is to unveil those wines and to learn from them, try to understand how they are made, any tasting notes that we can compare ours with, and learn from the wine through our tasting notes. This is wine number 1, Louis Jadot Beaujolais 2024, and wine number 2, which is another Beaujolais, but a cru, a Morgon from the 2022 vintage. All right, so it's not always easy to find information about those wines online, but this is what I got for you. And we'll try to interpret what those informations mean and how it could be related to the tasting notes that I shared with you. So there is an harvest note, which is quite interesting. They describe, warm weather in February and March, and April and May was cool, rainy, so it slowed down the growth of the vines, delaying flowering in June. And the temperature rose to normal in July, but then they had a lot of rainfall and again a cool September, which is just before the harvest. So a hypothesis that I can put forward is that the wine was very acidic because the fruit was not fully ripe at pickup. Probably it had enough sugar to make the wine, but maybe that was one reason that the wine was acidic, or it was a stylistic choice from the winemaker. The tasting note, plump, juicy wine. So juicy often means that It could mean two things, that the wine makes you salivate or that the fruits are very fresh fruit notes. Bright aromas, so aromas that are quite noticeable. Strawberry and black cherry. So I had some cherry and my peers had a lot of red fruits as well. Describe it at medium body. I found myself it was a bit light on the light body side and typically high acidity. So again, this tasting note tells us that it's probably a stylistic choice to make this wine more acidic. And then we have the description, the technical data. It's only 12% alcohol. And something that you might want to explore as a wine student who wants to deepen your wine knowledge is what does the extended maceration could provide to the sensory profile of the wine. Here it says, well, it's for maximum extraction of colors and tannins. So tannins are responsible for delivering the structure of the wine, but sometimes, the wine can be very dry and astringent. So try to get as much information on the wine to interpret your tasting notes. And you can also compare your tasting notes with the tasting note provided. It's not that one tasting note is correct and the other one is incorrect. It's more to look at the words that they are using and how they can be translated into your notes. As I mentioned, plump, juicy wine might refer to the acidity, the freshness of the fruit. Bright aromas, quite noticeable aromas, and that's my interpretation. But again, you are studying for yourself. There is no wrong or right answers in the way that you are describing wine. It's more for you to understand your perceptions and how the wine is technically described here. Let's look at the other wine, which was a Morgon, Château de Pizay. Here we have a little bit more information about the winemaking process. It says that winemaking combines tradition with the use of stainless steel, semi-carbonic fermentation, and modern temperature control to ensure the preservation of the fruit and the freshness of the wines. The tasting notes says dark and deep with a full nose enhanced with spices, wood, and discrete scent of resins. In the mouth, it is warm, round, supple, and seductive, whatever it means. So if we look at my tasting notes, I had some red fruits, and the spices that I had were licorice, and they don't describe the wood characters or the sensations that could be imparted by wood, but I had some chocolate and vanilla that could come from wood barrels. They don't mention that the wine aged in oak barrels, but maybe they were preserved in neutral oak barrels, and that's maybe where the chocolate vanilla character came out for me. They mentioned that the wine is warm, and that's definitely descriptor linked to the alcohol perception warming up in your mouth. Supple, I would disagree because I find it quite astringent and drying my mouth. But again, there is no wrong or right. It's a way for you to connect those words with the technicality of the wines, if we can. So stainless steel, there shouldn't be too many oak character, but they mention wood here, so there must be some wood contact at some point. The semi-carbonic fermentation definitely is a technique that favors the expression of fresh fruits. And the fact that the temperature was preserved is really to make sure that those fruits stay fresh in their expression, meaning that no cooked fruits, no dry fruits, but more fresh fruits. So as I said earlier, sometimes it's difficult to find this technical information, especially because you don't want to be influenced by those technical information. So it's better to look for them after your tasting. Again, it's a better way to approach learning wine through tasting by starting by sensing and then interpreting what you sense rather than the reverse. So this is your bottom-up process of sensory tasting. It's very simple. You can do it at home. is start by sensing first, doing a blind tasting, minimizing any information you can have on the wine to remain more objective in your evaluation. The less you know, the better. Describe as precisely as possible. You can use the wine aroma wheel, get the information on the wine, and then the last step is to interpret your perception with the technical information that you're able to retrieve. I also encourage you to do comparative tasting, to taste 2 wines at a time, to learn to compare and contrast, and really to sharpen your ability to differentiate small flavor nuances between 2 wines. The interpretation part, that's where your vast wine knowledge is handy. Go back to your courses, your textbooks, to really understand how semi-carbonic carbonation can have an influence on those Gamay wines, how temperature at harvest, rainfall, how climate can impact the maturation of the berries and therefore the development of flavors later on, or the development of the tannins later on, and the color. So these are technical information that you should have available online or in your textbooks. Again, keep that second. Focus on the wines to make sure that the wine tells you what it wants to share with you. So that's a simple protocol that you can replicate at home. And instead of relying on rote memorization to describe wine, you really start to gain confidence in letting your senses explore the wine for itself. And if you want to practice the bottom-up process, sensory tasting, I invite you to join my online community, The Curious Palates. It's an open space where we reawaken your senses to help you gain sensory confidence in evaluating wines. And the goal is really to build your sensory repertoire and help you be more articulate and more precise in your wine evaluation. Why? Because then you can connect all these great descriptors with the technical features that you learn about the wines. If you like this video, please subscribe, like it, and share with anyone who might benefit from it. I'm Dr. Isabelle Lesschave, your wine tasting coach. Cheers to your success.